Let me ask you something. What if the life everyone pities is actually the life that builds power? What if the man sitting alone in his room tonight is not lonely, but preparing? See, the world is quick to label a man with no girlfriend, no crowd, no noise as missing something. But maybe, just maybe, he's not missing anything. Maybe he's removing distractions. A man who chooses to live alone is often misunderstood by the world around him. People look at his silence and assume emptiness, but they fail to recognize intention. Solitude is not the absence of life, it is the presence of focus. When a man steps away from constant noise, he is not disconnecting from life. He is reconnecting with himself. In a world addicted to distraction, choosing solitude is an act of discipline. It means he is no longer willing to let outside opinions shape his direction. Instead, he is learning to sit with his thoughts, confront his reality, and understand the depth of who he is without interference. There is a hidden strength in being alone that most people never develop. When no one is around to validate him, he begins to validate himself. When there is no audience, there is no performance, only truth. That truth can be uncomfortable at first. It exposes weaknesses, fears, and unresolved emotions. But instead of running from them, he sits with them. He studies them. He learns from them. This process slowly turns emotional confusion into emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is not built in crowds. It is built in quiet rooms where honesty cannot be escaped. Solitude also sharpens clarity. In relationships, conversations, and social environments, a man is constantly adjusting himself to fit into situations. But alone, there is no adjustment required. There is only reflection. And in that reflection, priorities become clearer. He begins to see what truly matters and what was only noise. Goals that once felt distant begin to feel possible because his energy is no longer scattered. Instead of reacting to life, he starts designing it. He becomes more intentional with his time, more careful with his decisions, and more aware of where his life is actually heading. Most people fear being alone because they confuse it with being abandoned. But solitude is not abandonment. It is elevation. It is the decision to step out of emotional chaos and into mental order. A man in solitude is not waiting for life to happen. He is actively building the internal structure needed to handle it. This is where discipline is formed. Waking up without applause, working without recognition, and improving without pressure creates a foundation that cannot be easily broken. It is in this space that a man stops being reactive and starts becoming deliberate. Over time, solitude becomes a training ground. It teaches patience when nothing is happening fast enough. It teaches resilience when motivation fades. It teaches consistency when no one is watching. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches independence, not just financial or physical, but emotional independence. A man who understands himself in solitude no longer depends on others to feel complete. He carries a sense of stability within him that cannot be easily shaken by external circumstances. That is not isolation, that is preparation. And in that preparation, something powerful begins to happen. The man who once felt like he was alone starts realizing he was actually being refined. Every quiet moment was shaping his mindset. Every silent night was strengthening his discipline. Every day without distraction was sharpening his purpose. What looked like stillness from the outside was actually movement on the inside. Because true transformation rarely happens in noise, it happens in silence, where no one sees it, but everything changes. A man living without a girlfriend is often judged through a narrow lens by society. People assume something is missing in his life, as if companionship is the only proof of emotional fulfillment. But what they fail to understand is that absence of distraction is not absence of purpose. In fact, for many men, stepping away from romantic involvement is not rejection of love. It is a deliberate redirection of energy. It is the conscious decision to stop scattering attention and start concentrating on something deeper, something longer lasting, something that builds identity rather than temporary emotion. In a world where attention is constantly being pulled in every direction, focus has become a rare form of strength. Every message, every social expectation, every emotional demand competes for mental space. Relationships, while meaningful, also require emotional investment, compromise, and continuous attention. A man who chooses solitude in a certain phase of his life is not escaping responsibility. He is prioritizing clarity. He understands that divided attention produces divided results. So instead of splitting his energy between emotional highs and personal development, he channels it into building discipline, structure, and direction. Focus is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not seek approval or validation. It works quietly, consistently, and often invisibly. While others are caught in cycles of emotional drama, comparison, or dependency, he is refining his habits. He is waking up earlier, thinking deeper, and working longer on things that matter to his future. This kind of focus does not come from motivation. It comes from intention. And intention is what separates temporary effort from long-term transformation. There is also a powerful psychological shift that happens when a man removes unnecessary distractions from his life. He begins to see time differently. Hours that once disappeared into conversations, emotional confusion, or social expectations suddenly become available. And in that space, creativity begins to grow. He starts thinking about his goals more seriously. He starts questioning his direction more honestly. He starts building systems for improvement instead of routines for comfort. Focus turns into structure, and structure turns into progress. What people often misunderstand is that focus requires sacrifice. A man who is building himself cannot afford to be everywhere emotionally at once. He cannot constantly divide his attention between who he is becoming and who he is trying to impress. There comes a stage where growth demands separation from noise, not because relationships are wrong, but because timing matters. There are seasons for connection, and there are seasons for construction. And in the construction phase, attention must be protected like currency. Over time, this level of focus creates transformation that is visible in every area of life. His thinking becomes sharper. His decisions become more calculated. His goals become more defined. He is no longer reacting emotionally to every situation. He is responding strategically. The world may still see a man alone, but internally he is not empty. He is occupied with purpose. And that purpose becomes stronger than any temporary distraction ever could be. Before a man can truly understand the world around him, he must first understand the world within him. A man who lives alone without the distractions of a relationship is given something rare in today's world: space to study himself. Not the version of himself shaped by others' expectations, but the raw, unfiltered version that exists when no one is watching. This is not an easy process. Self-discovery is not comfortable, and it is not always encouraging. It demands honesty, and honesty is often the hardest thing a man can face. In solitude, he begins to notice patterns he previously ignored: how he reacts under pressure, how he handles failure, how he deals with silence. These are not things that are often revealed in social settings because most people are too busy performing roles rather than observing reality. But alone, there is no performance. There is only truth, and in that truth, he starts to see both his strengths and his weaknesses clearly. This awareness becomes the foundation of real growth, because you cannot improve what you refuse to acknowledge. He also starts questioning himself in ways he never did before. Questions like, what kind of man am I becoming? What do I actually value? Am I living by intention or by habit? These questions do not have immediate answers, but they force reflection. And reflection leads to awareness. Awareness leads to change. This process is slow, but it is deep. It is not about quick transformation. It is about permanent transformation. He is not trying to become someone different overnight. He is trying to understand who he is at his core. Learning oneself also involves confronting uncomfortable truths. There are moments when he realizes he has made excuses in the past. Moments when he sees that fear has guided some of his decisions. Moments when he understands that certain habits have held him back more than external circumstances ever did. This realization can be painful, but it is necessary because growth does not come from denial. It comes from acceptance. And acceptance is the first step toward change. As he continues this journey, he begins to separate who he truly is from who he was told to be. Society, family, and environment all leave imprints on a man's identity. But solitude allows him to question those imprints. Are these beliefs actually mine, or were they inherited without thought? Are my goals truly mine, or are they shaped by comparison? This separation is powerful because it allows authenticity to emerge. And authenticity is the foundation of confidence that does not depend on external validation. Over time, this self-learning becomes a lifelong process rather than a temporary phase. He realizes that understanding oneself is not a destination. It is an ongoing evolution. Every experience adds another layer of awareness. Every challenge reveals another part of his character. And every quiet moment alone becomes an opportunity to grow deeper rather than just move forward. In learning himself first, he builds something far more valuable than approval or attention. He builds identity. A man who lives alone often develops something that cannot be taught in crowded spaces. Emotional strength forged in silence. When there is no constant reassurance, no immediate comfort, and no one to absorb his emotional weight, he is forced to learn how to carry himself. At first, this can feel heavy. Thoughts become louder in quiet moments, doubts become more noticeable, and internal struggles cannot be easily hidden behind distraction. But over time, this silence becomes training. What once felt like pressure slowly becomes power. In the absence of external validation, he begins to confront emotions directly instead of escaping them. Many people avoid uncomfortable feelings by staying busy, staying social, or staying distracted. But a man in solitude does not always have that option. When he is faced with disappointment, fear, or uncertainty, he must process it internally. This process builds emotional resilience. He learns that emotions are not enemies to be avoided. They are signals to be understood. And understanding them makes him stronger than suppressing them ever could. There are nights when everything feels louder than usual. Moments when overthinking tries to take control, when past mistakes replay in his mind, and when future uncertainty creates pressure. But in these moments, something important develops: mental endurance. Instead of immediately seeking distraction or validation, he learns to sit with discomfort. He learns that pain does not require immediate escape. Sometimes it requires patience. And patience in emotional struggle builds a kind of strength that does not collapse under pressure easily. This emotional strength is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about becoming stable. A man who builds strength in silence does not lose his ability to feel. He gains control over how his feelings influence his actions. He does not react impulsively to every emotional wave. Instead, he observes, processes, and responds with intention. This shift is subtle but powerful. It separates emotional instability from emotional maturity. And maturity is not measured by age. It is measured by awareness and control. As time passes, he starts to notice that situations which once overwhelmed him no longer have the same effect. Where he once reacted with frustration, he now responds with calmness. Where he once felt easily discouraged, he now finds perspective. This is not because life becomes easier, but because he becomes stronger. Silence has trained him to withstand emotional pressure without breaking. It has taught him that stability does not come from outside circumstances, but from internal discipline. Eventually, this strength becomes part of his identity. He is no longer someone who fears being alone with his thoughts. Instead, he understands that his strongest growth happened in those very moments. The silence that once felt uncomfortable becomes the space where clarity is found. And the emotional battles he fought privately become the foundation of his resilience. He no longer needs noise to feel okay. He carries his strength quietly, consistently, and without announcement. A man living alone is often misunderstood as someone who is waiting for life to happen, waiting for the right relationship, the right opportunity, or the right moment to begin. But what appears to be waiting from the outside is actually preparation happening in silence. There is a major difference between the two. Waiting is passive. Preparation is active. Waiting depends on time. Preparation uses time. And a man who understands this difference stops measuring his life by what he lacks and starts measuring it by what he is building. In this phase of solitude, he begins to treat himself like a long-term project rather than a temporary version of himself. He is not rushing into emotional commitments or external validation because he understands that anything built on an unstable foundation will eventually collapse. Instead, he focuses on strengthening the internal structure of his life, his habits, his discipline, his mindset, and his direction. Every day becomes an opportunity to refine something within himself, not for attention, not for approval, but for alignment with who he wants to become. Preparation is not always exciting. In fact, it is often repetitive, quiet, and unseen. It does not come with applause or recognition. It is waking up when no one is watching. It is working when motivation is absent. It is continuing even when progress feels slow. But this is exactly where real transformation happens. While others are seeking immediate results, he is building long-term stability. He understands that consistency is more valuable than intensity, and discipline is more powerful than emotion. So he commits to showing up for himself even when there is no external reward. There is also a deeper shift happening in his mindset. He stops asking, when will something happen for me? And starts asking, what am I becoming through this process? This question changes everything. It moves his focus from external circumstances to internal growth. Instead of depending on timing, he focuses on development. Instead of waiting for opportunities, he builds readiness. Because he knows that opportunities do not create success, prepared individuals do. And preparation ensures that when opportunity arrives, he is not surprised by it. He is ready for it. In this stage, he also becomes more intentional with his energy. He no longer invests himself in things that do not contribute to his growth. He becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. Every habit, every decision, every action is filtered through one question. Does this move me closer to the man I am trying to become? If the answer is no, he learns to let it go. This level of discipline may look like distance from the outside, but internally it is focus. And focus is the foundation of real progress. Over time, this preparation starts to change his identity. He no longer sees himself as someone stuck in between where he is and where he wants to be. Instead, he sees himself as someone actively building the bridge between the two. He understands that becoming is a process, not an event. And because of that, he stops rushing. He stops comparing. He stops expecting immediate transformation. Instead, he trusts the process he is committed to. And in that trust, he becomes steady, grounded, and unshakable in his direction. A man living alone is often measured by the wrong standard. Society tends to attach value to visibility, who you are, with how often you are seen, and what kind of relationship you display to the world. If a man is single, assumptions are made. If he is alone, questions are raised. But these judgments are shallow because they confuse presence with purpose. A man's worth has never been tied to whether someone stands beside him. It is tied to what he stands for when no one is there. The truth is, relationship status is not a reflection of identity. It is simply a circumstance, a phase, or a choice, yet many people allow it to define their self-image. A man who understands himself does not fall into that trap. He does not see being single as a weakness or being in a relationship as a victory. Instead, he sees both as different stages of life, each requiring different levels of readiness. His focus shifts away from comparison and toward construction of character, discipline, and direction. What truly defines a man is not who he is connected to, but who he is when he is completely on his own. When there is no audience, no validation, and no external reflection, what remains is truth. Is he disciplined when no one is watching? Is he consistent when no one is applauding? Is he still growing when there is no emotional distraction to rely on? These questions reveal far more about his value than any relationship ever could, because real worth is not performed, it is proven in silence. There is also a powerful realization that develops over time. Dependence on relationships for identity creates instability. If a man builds his sense of value entirely on being with someone, then loss or change can shake his entire foundation. But when he builds value from within, relationships become additions to his life, not the definition of it. He no longer enters connections seeking completion. He enters them from a place of completeness. That shift changes everything about how he loves, how he chooses, and how he respects himself. This understanding gives him a different kind of confidence. Not loud confidence that seeks attention, but quiet confidence that does not need approval. He stops measuring himself against others' timelines. He stops feeling behind just because he is alone. Instead, he recognizes that growth does not follow a fixed schedule. Some people learn through relationships, others learn through solitude. But both paths are only valuable when they lead to self-awareness and maturity. Eventually, he begins to realize that his identity was never meant to be borrowed from someone else. It was meant to be built, refined, and strengthened from within. Being alone does not reduce his value, it reveals it. It strips away distractions and exposes what remains. And what remains is not emptiness, but potential. Potential shaped by discipline, awareness, and purpose. In that understanding, he no longer sees himself as incomplete. He sees himself as under construction, continuously becoming more aligned with the man he is meant to be. And maybe that is the real misunderstanding of life itself. We are taught to fear solitude, to see it as absence, to treat it like something must be fixed. But not every quiet season is a punishment. Some seasons are preparation. Some seasons are alignment. Some seasons are where a man is shaped when no one is watching, so that when the world finally sees him, they don't recognize the effort. They only recognize the result. Because in the end, it was never about who stayed beside him. It was about who he became when nobody did. And a man like that is never truly alone.